Hello to anyone who is just joining us. We're going to start the webinar in just a few minutes. If you'd like, you can say hello in the chat box. Let us know where you're tuning in from. All over the globe. Welcome, welcome. It's going so fast, I can't even read all the countries. I see Germany, New York, Ireland. Thank you for joining us, everyone. Okay, we are going to get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Whitney English. I'm a registered dietitian with a master's degree in nutrition, healthspan, and longevity, and I'm thrilled to be moderating this exciting discussion on the fasting mimicking diet, or FMD for short, and the groundbreaking research behind it. I'm a former student of Dr. Valter Longo's. I completed parts of my dietetic internship in the Longo lab at El Nutra and at Norris Cancer Center. And I've also personally completed several rounds of fasting and FMDs, and I can say from experience that it is truly life-changing. Joining us today is none other than Dr. Valter Longo, a world-renowned biogerontologist and the pioneer behind the FMD. He is the active director of the Longevity Institute at the University of Southern California, the founder of El Nutra, the makers of the only commercially available FMD on the market, and also the founder of Create Cures Foundation, who is hosting us today, a 501c nonprofit organization working to find cures for serious diseases, including cancer. Dr. Longo's work has been instrumental in advancing our understanding of fasting and its profound impact on health and longevity. The research that led to the development of FMD spans over 25 years, but it's in the last 8 years since FMD became widely available and its research in humans became a focal point that we've seen remarkable advancements in its application. Today, we'll be taking a chronological journey through some of the most significant milestones in FMD research, specifically studies in humans, from its early findings in people with metabolic conditions, prediabetes, and heart disease, to the latest studies on biological age reduction. Our goal today is to give you an overview of how this innovative approach is changing the landscape of healthcare with insights into future research directions and potential new applications in personalized medicine. Dr. Longo, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Whitney. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, we're really looking forward to finding out what's the latest in the science behind FMD. I want to let you guys all know that if you have questions throughout the webinar, we have a Q&A box. You can drop them in there, and we will try to address them throughout the webinar. But if we don't get to them, we are saving time at the end to answer questions. Okay, so let's get started. Valter, for our audience who may be new to this, could you explain what the FMD is and why it's such a revolutionary approach to nutrition and health?
Yeah, so the FMD, we started this at USC. We were working on water-only fasting in mice and eventually in chemotherapy resistance, right? So, and eventually this turned into a clinical trial at USC Norris Cancer Center on water-only fasting and chemotherapy sensitivity in patients. And we were sure that they were going to do it because we thought, of course, somebody has cancer, they're going to be highly motivated. But we were surprised to see, and the oncologists, I think, were surprised to see that patients did not want to do water-only fasting. They felt cheated and certainly uncertain about the method that we came up with. And I think the oncologists were also not very comfortable with telling patients go home and don't eat anything for 3 or 4 days. So then we went back to the government, the National Institute of Aging, National Cancer Institute, and they funded research to develop a fasting mimicking diet. And so its job is to mimic fasting, meaning achieving the same effects or very similar effects as water-only fasting on different markers. One of them is called IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor 1. One is called IGF-BP1, glucose and ketone bodies, and most people know what those are. So once we achieved that, then the initial use was for cancer, but then, of course, from the very beginning, I thought this should be something that everybody can do. And of course, the challenge was, can we intervene for just 5 days and then with these 5 days of a fasting mimicking diet have long-term effects, right? So we had no idea. It could have been that you just do the 5 days and then things go away 2 days later, right? And so nobody knew, nobody had done this kind of studies. And even the studies on water-only fasting like that were nearly non-existent. I mean, there were studies, there were clinics that were doing 2-3 weeks of fasting, but nobody had ever done cycles of fasting like this. And so we had, we spent the last however many years doing basic research, but also clinical trials on the FMD.
And I'm sure the doctors were relieved, since initially coming to them with the idea of water-only fasting was pretty shocking to most people. This approach was probably more palatable.
Yeah, I think the doctors, this was important for the cancer, for the oncologists, but I think in general, I realized early on, and so sometimes I get accused, well, you start a company, couldn't this be free? And couldn't this be just people going home and cook it up? And I think we realized, especially from the doctors, that they wanted the standardization, right? They wanted to say, whether it's cancer or diabetes or cardiovascular disease, whatever use you have, we want to have exactly what you tested clinically, right? We want to see the results from clinical studies, possibly and preferably independent clinical studies. And then we make a decision whether we think our patients should undergo this. And so there's many reasons, not just helping the patients, but I think this standardization, of course, will be very much required for the FDA. But even whether in cases where the FDA is not required, the use of these FMDs in the clinic needs to be standardized for doctors to accept it.
Right. On that note, can you share a little bit more about the two companies you founded, L-Nutra and your nonprofit organization Create Cures, and specifically how these companies work together to support health and longevity through FMDs?
Yeah, well, there's a company and there's a foundation, right? They don't work together because that's not allowed, right? So I try very careful to keep them apart. But of course, I mean, all my consulting that I will normally receive, all that in L-Nutra goes to the foundation. And so the foundation is able to do webinars like this and is able to follow thousands of patients, both in Los Angeles and different sites in Europe, thousands of patients, about half of them with cancer, and lots of patients that cannot afford it, lots of patients that can only afford part of what the consultation will be. So we do lots of education programs with the Create Cures. We have now longevity, nutrition and longevity festivals, both in Europe and in Los Angeles, and particularly in Los Angeles, in South Central Los Angeles. So we're focused on areas that are underserved communities. Yeah, so this and also over 95% of my shares will be donated to charity, with the other 5% invested in companies that we feel are important for longevity, and all the equity from that investment also going to charity, right? So it's essentially 100%. So that's like my disclosure slide. And but yeah, and L-Nutra, of course, I founded in 2009 because I thought, if I don't do this, it's not going to happen, right? And I think I was right, because I think now we've I think completed maybe 30 clinical trials in many different hospitals all over the world, and maybe I have another 20 running right now. And almost every couple of weeks, let's say, we get a request from a different university saying, "I'm interested in this. Can we get the product for free and see what happens on a disease," right? So I think just if you think about that, if the company was not around, it'll be impossible, right? We will have to start training doctors, to train people, to cook something at home. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, this would be a disaster at many levels, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so I think that what we're doing, what we've achieved would not have been possible without the company. So very happy and very proud of the company, even though I try to keep my professor hat on all the time. making sure that the company keeps the focus on patients and not profits. It's not easy because, of course, companies have to worry about shareholders. But I think that my job is to worry about the patients.
Well, that's incredible. And we're all so grateful for all the work you do. And thank you for that insightful introduction to the fasting mimicking diet. Now we're going to dive into the research timeline and explore the major milestones that have shaped FMD's development. We'll walk through key studies that have applied FMD to different health areas, starting with neurodegenerative diseases and moving through cancer, metabolic health, autoimmune conditions, Alzheimer's, and biological aging. So we're going to start with 2017 when FMD was investigated in a generally healthy population. What were the key findings for this group?
Yeah, so in 2017, finally, we got to test the fasting mimicking diet. And by the way, there are many different fasting mimicking diets, right? So this is for people that are not diagnosed with any diseases. It's 5 day long. It's a plant-based, low calorie, low sugar, low protein, high fat diet. And so in 2017, we finally got to publish in Science Translational Medicine the paper describing a 100 people, 100 participant trial in which the participant did 3 cycles of the fasting mimicking diet once a month for 3 months. And then 1 week later, we let them go back to their normal diet. And 1 week later, we measured everything. So it was baseline against a few months later after 3 cycles of the FMD. And the results, I think, were remarkable. So we started to see lots of markers and risk factors reduction, right? So and it was about aging, it was about cardiovascular disease, metabolic disease, inflammatory disease. So we started to see, particularly in people that started with high levels of them at the beginning. So if somebody had normal C-reactive protein at baseline, nothing much happened. But if somebody had elevated CRP, now we saw many of the patients moving back to the normal level. If somebody had normal IGF-1, this IGF-1 is associated with lots of different cancers. If they had, let's say, 150, not much happened. But if they had 280, a lot of them, on average, came down to a much lower, or the group on average came down to a much lower level. Same thing for cholesterol, blood pressure, fasting glucose, et cetera, et cetera. So this was the first study saying, I think, backing what we saw or supporting what we saw in the mice, which was multi-system regeneration, rejuvenation. And so in the mice, we were publishing that stem cells at the end of the fasting mimicking diet, stem cells would be activated. But also in the pancreas, the stem cells were not activated, but the pancreatic cells were reprogrammed into generating. If we damage their, reduce their ability to make insulin, they were reprogrammed to make insulin again, right? And so we started seeing this in the gut, in this nervous system, lots of different systems. But we thought, well, we now, how do we do this in people? And so the 2017 study was the first one to say, okay, maybe what we see in mice and rats is also happening in people. Otherwise, how do you justify all these different markers, all these risk factors for different diseases going back to a much better level, and in many cases, going back to the normal levels, right? So that's where we think this FMD is really powerful for many, many people, because it's just helping lots of different systems and not just specifically targeted like most drugs to one target, one disease.
Incredible. We have a question that came in. Someone asked, if I was doing the FMD monthly but still eating a standard American diet, would the protective effects of the FMD still apply? And I think you said in this study, they were still eating their standard diets in between.
Yes, they were advised to continue with their lifestyle exactly as it was before, right? So, and in fact, those that we think had the worst diet because they started with lots of problems, not just one, those are the ones that did the best, right? Everybody or most people improved, but those that started from a worse baseline did the best. But then eventually in 2021, we published a human study before the mouse study. And in the mouse study, we published in Nature Metabolism, we actually did exactly that experiment, right? Which cannot be done in humans. So what if we take the worst possible diet that you can feed animals? And so it was a high sugar, high fat, high calorie diet. And the mice on this diet became very big and very unhealthy, and they died much earlier. It's really impressive what a bad Western diet can do, even to a mouse. And so then we just did that plus 5 days a month, only once a month, 5 days a month of the FMD. And everything is almost like too good to be true, because if you look at the paper, it's everything from cholesterol. Cholesterol went up on the bad diet and it came back down to normal. Glycemia went up and it came down to normal. And lifespan went way down in the bad diet. And just the 5 days a month of the FMD brought it back up. Now, obviously I preach two things, which is a longevity diet, a very healthy everyday diet, a 12-hour time restricted eating, plus the fasting-mimicking diet. So I'm not trying to say, okay, this is a substitute for good habits, but I'm saying that a lot of people are never going to change their diet. So when it was clear that tobacco was bad for people, only about half of the people that smoke quit, right? And as bad as tobacco is, a lot of people keep smoking. So we cannot have the position of saying, well, you're on your own. If you're going to keep smoking, you're going to have to die earlier. So I think it's important to say there's people that are not going to be able to make big changes. And for those, okay, maybe, well, clearly you can help against that by doing the FMD, once a month or much less. Now in Southern Italy, we're testing the effects once every 3 months, right? And the results, I have to say start looking very promising.
So this is not an endorsement for the standard American diet, but you could have massive effects on your health even if you did continue to eat not according to the longevity diet.
Right.
Okay, we're going to move on to 2020. FMD was explored in cancer, and since then there have been 4 major trials published. How have you found that FMD impacts patients with cancer?
So cancer is probably the toughest disease to address, right? Because there's many different cancers, and even for those many different cancers, many different treatments, right? So it's very closely regulated by the FDA, as it should be. So what we've done with the FMD and cancer has been to support the standard of care, right? So whether it's chemotherapy, radiation, hormone therapy, immunotherapy. And so the trials are looking very promising. So the first large one, 125 patients, was the Leiden one. The problem with the Leiden one, being the group that did fasting-mimicking diet cycles, this was breast cancer with FMD cycles or not. And the problem is that they were probably not followed very closely. This was in Holland, not followed very closely by dietitians that knew what they knew about fasting practices, right? So as you know, most schools teach you, not the USC program, but most other programs will teach you, you overfeed the patients. The cancer patient needs to eat a lot, right? So I think that there was some issues like that in the Leiden trial, but in spite of that, there was a improvement in the clinical response and pathological response in this group. Now, the Leiden initial trial was not ideal because these was patients that were about to receive surgery, and then they would go and they could be potentially cured or cancer-free. So I think that the survival for this patient population is very high. Let's say over 90%, maybe 95%. So there are positive results, but we're still careful because we're saying because the survival is so high, we need more time to determine whether somebody that has a very early stage cancer should make these changes and without having enough data behind it. Instead, the more exciting work comes out of the National Cancer Institute in Milan, where they did this for triple negative breast cancer, so much more aggressive metastatic cancers. And in this case, there are a number of studies showing, for example, immune cell infiltration into the tumor, a much more aggressive. So the patients with lots of cancers that did the fasting-mimicking diet had much more infiltration of immune cells into the cancer and much more aggressive immunity, let's say anti-cancer immunity. Then another study showed exceptional responses in a variety of advanced stage metastatic cancers, colorectal, pancreatic, lung, and breast. And then there was another study, still relatively small, but showing a nearly doubling of overall survival in the patients with triple-negative breast cancer doing FMD plus chemotherapy versus chemotherapy alone. So yes, overall, very promising. And I think I know there is another study that is going to be published soon with a larger number of patients supporting these results for triple-negative breast cancer. So I think patients should talk to their oncologist and see if, even though we need more studies, if this is something that if they cannot wait for the more studies, and this is something that the oncologist thinks that should be done, should be combined with standard of care therapy. But now I just want to add quickly, that's the old world of fasting mimicking diet and cancer. The new world is much more technological. So now we publish a number of papers in mice showing what we have two different things that are very exciting. One is FMD together with escape pathway blockers. So we do the fasting mimicking diet on the mice, lots of different cancers. And then we do what's called RNA-seq. And we look at how the cancer cell rewires to survive the FMD treatment. And then we can quickly identify this and then use drugs that block these escape pathways, right? And we see like remarkable reversal of the cancer growth. So lots of cancers growing very fast. And then we identify the escape pathways, we target them with standard drugs, FDA approved, and the cancer comes down rapidly. So that's one exciting thing that now we're trying to bring to the clinic. And the other exciting thing is combination with non-toxic drugs, right? So we've done the first study with vitamin C. So what if we take 3 or 4 different drugs? The first example was 2, right? So you give mice with colorectal cancer and lots of other cancer, you give them just the vitamin C, and the vitamin C can be somewhat toxic to the cancer. But then you combine it with the fasting mimicking diet, and the toxicity goes up in some cases tenfold. So, so now we have vitamin C and FMD, both anti-aging intervention, working much better than chemotherapy in killing cancer cells, right? So that's, you can see why that's exciting, because could we come up, and now we're working on 3 drugs and 4 drugs, could we come up with a completely non-toxic cocktail that can serve as a little bit as an antibiotic for cancer, right? And so, although it's a little bit science fiction, we're thinking, is it possible that, you know, in some years we can go to a doctor and have a non-toxic cocktail that you take just to, you know, just in case there are cancer cells circulating and to get rid of them, right? Yeah, see,
Wouldn't that be amazing?
Lots of work between that now and then, but I think we now see how that's going to be a possibility, and the data are very supportive of it.
That's incredible. Well, at the moment, we see the FMD enhancing the effects of chemo. We have a question that came in. Do the chemo meds ever interfere with the FMD?
You mean the FMD interfere with the chemo?
I think that the question was phrased that way, but I'm wondering, I know generally we see this synergetic effect. Is there any way that the two, I suppose, could inhibit each other?
Careful because, and this is why we stress that there should be very carefully designed methods, right? And I'll give you an example. So let's say somebody does chemo, and then in the middle of the chemo, the patient start refeeding. Now that's a big problem, right? It's a big problem because now you could have a chemo that itself is a carcinogen associated with a rapid proliferation, cellular proliferation. And this is a problem, right? And so then I think my message is it has to be the clinically tested FMD plus the clinically tested method. Otherwise, improvisation could lead to a lot of examples like what I just talked about, which is now you go from something protective. And for example, intermittent fasting in a mouse study. So 1 day feeding, 1 day fasting was shown together. So by our method, we showed that the cardiotoxicity of doxorubicin decreased in mice. But if you do, instead of doing the long fasting that we do and the timing with the chemo, if you do intermittent fasting and you keep giving chemo, the cardiotoxicity goes up, right?
Oh, wow.
So why? Because of what I just said, same idea, right? So now you're combining refeeding with, and that's what intermittent fasting does. 1 day feed and 1 day fast. But then you have the like continuous refeeding every so many hours. And now you have lots of chemotherapy in the system, plus a lots of refeeding. And that you can see as a recipe for disaster.
It's not something to take lightly and do on your own. It sounds like you're saying this should really be done for cancer patients specifically under the care of a professional who is experienced with FMDs.
Not just a professional, I would recommend. So we have a nonprofit, the Create Cures clinic, and I would recommend that people contact our team. We see the nutritionist dietitians see thousands of patients every year, thousands of cancer patients, and so they're very used to dealing with lots of different situations. It doesn't have to be our team; it could be somebody else, but it has to be somebody trained in this particular world, right? Not just somebody that has never seen any of this. It's very, very much more complicated, as I just explained, than anybody trained in the general nutritional world will appreciate.
Well, we have so many more questions about cancer, but in the interest of saving time for questions at the end, we're going to move on to our next topic. In the years 2022, 2023, and 24, there was a strong focus on FMD's impact on metabolic health and type 2 diabetes. Can you walk us through the significant outcomes in these populations and how you believe this research is going to impact the future of diabetes care and heart health?
Yes, so I'm very excited about the cancer, but I think, again, hundreds of cancers, hundreds of therapies. Diabetes is very different, right? And diabetes is a much clearer disease, much wider disease. A lot more people have it, and really in desperate need for something that doesn't cause a lot of side effects and brings you back to full health. And so now we have 5 trials that started with prediabetes, and then the last 2 diabetes, and we are about to publish another one with lots of diabetes patients. And there is a few more that are related to diabetes. So for example, one that we're about to publish on kidney disease patient, right? So if in some of it, I cannot talk about the details, but so I'm aware now of the final results of 7 or 8 trials. And the results are very consistent, very consistent. So we see between 60 and 70% diabetes regression after 6 to 12 cycles or monthly cycles of the fasting mimicking diet. And now a number of these trials have done by completely independent universities like University of Heidelberg, University of Leiden. And I'm pointing this out because some that listen say, well, Longo is running the trials and he has the company. And yeah, so no. Most of the trials are done by independent universities that have no interest in the results, and they could go one way or another, and they're going to report it as it is, right? So I think it's not conclusive yet, but certainly conclusive enough to tell the endocrinologist you should definitely combine standard of care with the FMD very carefully, in the hope that you see what we see in the 60-70% of patients, which is you're going to reduce the drug use. And I think the very nice thing has been that, like in the first trial, we're not just seeing effects on the A1C, lowering of A1C and lowering of drug use. We're also starting to see effect on lowering of hypertension medication, right? And so this is really what we want, and no lean body mass loss. And this is really remarkable. If you think about the GLP-1 agonist and lots of these drugs, which have a lot of side effects. Now there's a new study showing that they cause bone density loss, right? So muscle loss, bone density loss for the drugs, and lots of other side effects. And I think, and also what's established, these drugs don't bring you back to health. They just keep you in that okay state for as long as you use the drugs, right? And now we're seeing, I think about 15% of the patients or so in 1 year, they go back to drug-free. So they go back to a healthy status, right? So we've seen in the clinic, within 2 or 3 years, we can bring most people back to a normal or near normal state, right? So yeah, so we're very excited about prediabetes and diabetes, also because of the, as 75% of people in the US are overweight or obese. And so this is a way for them to go back to a normal weight or close to a normal weight, no or minimal loss of lean body mass, and really going after lots of different problems, and not just the A1C and not just the diabetes, but many of the things that could be wrong with the system. Now we're assembling a 500 people clinical trial. We hope that Harvard, University of Rome, and University of Calabria will be involved, as well as the foundation. And I think that this 500 people trial hopefully will be conclusive, but more conclusive. But I don't think it's necessary to wait for that. Talk to your endocrinologist and give it a shot if the endocrinologist agrees or the doctor agrees. And this could be hopefully that 70% of patients having just remarkable improvements will be maintained when this goes to hundreds of thousands of patients.
I think the lean body mass retention that you touched on is really important to highlight, especially going back to cancer, because that is a major concern when people are going through chemotherapy, is the loss of the muscle mass, the potential for sarcopenia. So the fact that FMD actually can do the reverse of what some of these professionals are worried about, the loss of lean body mass, is incredible.
Yeah, and in the cancer trial, we showed the same thing. No, in fact, there was a gain of lean body mass in the University of Geneva trial. But I think the mistake made in that trial was overfeeding the patients between cycles, right? So there was no reason, we think, to have them increase lean body mass. It would have been better to keep the same lean body mass, not overfeed them between cycles, and fight the cancer more without getting lean body mass problems.
All right, we've got some questions coming in. Someone asked, people who are not metabolically flexible could go into hypoglycemia during rounds of FMD, causing a rise in stress hormones. Would that be a disadvantage, and how to deal with that?
Yeah, so hypoglycemia, usually you see it with when you combine the fasting-mimicking diet, or you could see it when you combine the fasting-mimicking diet with insulin or insulin-like drugs, right? So drugs that, including the GLP-1 agonists, which can cause insulin release, right? So yeah, so any combination with anything, first of all, anybody that's got a disease should talk to the doctor, right? And clear with the doctor and say, is this feasible? Then, if there are concerns for whatever reason on hypoglycemia, probably a continuous glucose monitor is a good idea, right? Doctor, a dietitian, a doctor, and a continuous glucose monitor. Once people get used to it and everybody's in agreement, there is no danger, then I don't think all of this is necessary. And maybe the dietitian and in the occasional visit with the doctor will be sufficient. But yes, hypoglycemia, be careful. Really haven't seen many problems. Even in the German trial, where they use all kinds of drugs for diabetes, including insulin releasers. But that doesn't mean that when you go to lots of people, lots of patients, that some of them could not have problems. So be very careful, because again, FMD together with insulin-like drugs could have a could cause a very, very big problem.
On the flip side, we've got a question asking about, someone said they've noticed that the meals on the FMD had caused a significant glucose spike beyond what I normally experience. How does this
Yeah,
lead
yeah.
to?
Yeah, so I think that I made it a big effort, and this is misinterpreted. I make a big effort to not get people into high ketosis and back down. And I did not want, I wanted to avoid this yo-yo, right? I wanted to keep them in ketosis, but not too much.
Mhm.
Now we're starting to think that maybe these spikes are central for the effects on glycemia, right? A1C. I mean, if you look at the results, even the endocrinologists were really shocked how powerful this was. And now we're thinking maybe it is because of the spikes and the combination of the fasting mimicking property with some these little spikes. They're not big spikes, but some people are bigger spikes. But yeah, so the spikes may actually aid in the reversal of insulin resistance. We don't know for sure yet. We don't know, actually. We know that it works, meaning we know that it has a major effect on reversing insulin resistance, causing insulin sensitivity, reducing A1C. Now, of course, if somebody gets the spikes and then they see no effects on their insulin resistance and the A1C and the fasting glucose, or maybe this is getting worse. That's when you want to then potentially, I mean, there are different products out there, and some of them are designed to cause lower spikes, but the one that causes the highest spikes so far is the most tested against diabetes and prediabetes. So as I've been told by an FDA former director, make sure, test it, and if it works, that's what you use, right? Don't think you know everything because you don't, right? So, and you don't know what works. And yeah, so a lot of people think of spikes as something bad that causes insulin resistance, but I will argue that they may aid not only in the sensitization, but also in the protection of muscle. So we don't know yet, but certainly that's what we see, and that could be an explanation.
We've got a question relating to heart health. Has there been research and results to demonstrate that FMD or autophagy reduces coronary artery calcified plaque?
No, we haven't done that yet. We've done cardio. I mean, we looked at cardiotoxicity and the recovery of the heart in mice from dobutamine toxicity. So we give well, first of all, we look at the heart and the functionality of the heart in the mouse as it ages, and that was improved. So the left ventricular ejection fraction was improved. In the FMD group. So this is a mouse receiving the Western diet, what I was talking about earlier, receiving the Western diet, and then getting the FMD once a month. So the ejection fraction was improved. And then we sort of simulated, if you will, it's not a great model for it, but I simulated a heart attack, right? So dobutamine, so a cardiotoxin, and then we look at recovery time in the mouse. And if they received the FMD, they were much better at recovery. But the plaques, we haven't done that yet. It's something that we are planning to do, but we haven't gotten there yet.
Someone else asked, when you say that cells are reprogrammed, what exactly does this mean? What in the cell is changing fundamentally?
Yeah, so we started showing this in 2014 with blood cells, right? Stem cells, hematopoietic stem cells. And in that case, we saw just more stem cells. But then when we look at the pancreas, we didn't see more stem cells or progenitor cells. We just saw the cells becoming non-alpha, non-beta, right? And so they were almost like de-differentiating, so in going to a more primordial state. And then when we look at the RNA, it was all the profile of embryonic development, meaning like including Yamanaka factors, right? So several Yamanaka factors were elevated. And so for the people that don't know what Yamanaka factors are, so Dr. Yamanaka got the Nobel Prize some years ago for identifying 4 factors that, when turned on, they reset the cell, any cell or lots of cells, into an embryonic-like state, right? And so now we did the fasting mimicking diet, and we saw the pancreatic cells acquiring this embryonic-like status with lots of different genes that you only see if you look at a fetus. developing pancreas, and then you go look at the genes that are expressed, and that's the profile we saw. So then the reprogramming, and this is very interesting because now on the news we heard a lot about reprogramming by forcing these Yamanaka factors, right? You take 3 or 4 Yamanaka factors, you force the mouse to express them all, right? But this is very uncoordinated. With the fasting mimicking diet, we're basically reactivating a innate system, right? So, and why is that? Well, like imagine that you starve for 6 months, right? And your body shrinks and shrinks tremendously, right? This actually semi-starvation studies were done by Ansel Keys back in the 40s. And so they semi-starve people. And in one study, they show some patients, their heart became 40% smaller. And then they refed them and their heart re-expands, right? So now what we think is happening is that the human body always had the ability to regenerate parts of its organs and systems because it was very common for people to go months with no food at all. So then you shrink, and the autophagy, and not just autophagy, because there's a lot of cellular killing. So you get rid of a lot of cells. Some cells you get rid of junk within the cell by autophagy, etc. And then you start activating the stem cells, and you begin the reprogramming lots of different cells. And you are, and the body, I mean, of course, we know this very well in mice and rats. It's harder to demonstrate in people, but we think it's happening. So now you stand by, and when food comes back around, that's your opportunity to rebuild. And you do this by multi-system regeneration, reprogramming, repair.
And so this is typically not happening as frequently in our modern times due to the overfed state. Is that what you're saying?
Not as frequent. It never happens. It never happens, right? So if you take an adult, this is why all these Yamanaka factors, all these factors are known to be never expressed in an adult. You take a mouse or a person and you check, and they're never on, right? Because the system is happy as is, right? So these genes are not turned on. I mean, maybe they're turned on during wound healing, right? So some of them might be turned on if you cut yourself or something like that happens. But in general, the great majority of these, and certainly the program, is off, and it stays off permanently.
And so did you say you're seeing in human clinical trials that the Yamanaka factors are being turned on by the FMD, or is this still preclinical?
Mice and rats.
Okay.
But now we're starting to see the circulating stem cells being up in people, right? So then, as we're seeing with the effects, then we saw them in people, now we're starting to see what we see in mice and rats, we're starting to see in people, at least the circulating progenitor and stem cells, they're elevated, in some cases greatly elevated. And so, so we think that we don't know, it's still early to know, is it the same? But I think we'd be very surprised if a lot of this was not conserved. These are very fundamental properties, probably that start from prokaryotes and single cell organism and go all the way to any organism in existence.
Well, this is a good segue into our last research topic, which is biological age reduction. The latest study came out in 2024. What were the implications of FMD on longevity in this study?
Yeah, so this study we have been working for a long time on, and it was the result of 2 trials, 2 different clinical trials, one done in Tennessee and one done at USC. And so in these trials, we measure 7 different markers, blood markers, and Morgan Levine, at the time she was at Yale, now she's at Altus Labs. So she developed something called BioAge, a BioAge method to measure biological age, right? So I really like this more than the epigenetic clock, although I also like the epigenetic clock. But I would say I like it more because it's based on markers that the laboratory can easily and carefully measure, right? Like cholesterol, blood pressure, A1C, C-reactive protein, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of these common markers that are used in determining biological age, and that's what we use. And so in both trials, we saw the same thing. After 3 cycles of the fasting mimicking diet, people that finished the trial, the cycles were on average 2.5 years, showed an average 2.5 years reduction of biological age using these markers, right? So now in the Calabria trial, with 500 people, we're looking at telomeres, we're looking at epigenetic clock, we're looking at, again, at the same bioage clock. So we're going to get a more conclusive result. But I think in these two trials involving 184 patients, the results being identical, 84 in one, 100 in the other, I think it's already very solid as is. But I think it'd be nice to see more confirmation of this in the future trial.
That's remarkable, though. 2.5 years for just 3 cycles. Hopefully.
Yeah. So now the idea, of course, is if you do that 3-4 times a year, let's say for 20 years, we had some projections. The reviewers did not like the projections, but there's big differences in life expectancy, and but also big differences in this projection. Of course, people always say, well, but you haven't demonstrated. Of course, you can't, it's impossible, right? The longest trial ever done that I know of is the one in monkeys, and it lasted 25 years. And then you can still argue it's only a monkey. So, unfortunately, we cannot do longevity trials in people. And so these surrogates are what we can do. And the projection is all we can do. And the projection also show, the a reduction in the risk for developing lots of different diseases. And that's, that's of course our focus, to get people to 110 healthy.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Longo. That was incredible learning about all of the recent research in FMD, and it's fascinating to see how far the science has come and the wide range of conditions that it's been applied to. So we're going to shift our focus now to the future. With such promising results across multiple areas, we want to hear about the ongoing and upcoming research that could further expand FMD's impact on health and longevity. Can you share with us the key areas that you see FMD research heading into the future?
Yes, so we finished in collaboration with University of Genoa, University of Perugia trial on Alzheimer's. We'll see the results soon. There are multiple trials on Crohn's disease, colitis. We'll see the results very soon. We are about to publish a trial on chemosensory, so the ability to smell and taste. And in those that have lost the ability to smell and taste, we'll publish that soon. Kidney disease patients and rats, we'll see the results soon. Yeah, so these are just some. I think there are many, many more ongoing trials. And yeah, so it's very exciting. I think it's very exciting because of this idea of the body being able to repair itself, and the fasting-mimicking diet sort of pushing the body, the human body, in that direction.
Absolutely. Truly multi-system effects. Do you think you could discuss any upcoming studies or new applications for personalized medicine or preventative healthcare?
Well, the personalization, I think, comes in with the use of the fasting-mimicking diet or the longevity diet, the everyday diet, and by the professional, right? So the professionals, I mean, certainly the team at the foundation clinics are trained for this, but lots of dietitians and doctors out there are trained. And so the personalization comes in at their level. And I think it's their job to say, which fasting-mimicking diet should be tested or used, and how frequently, and in combination with what, right? So what drugs, what everyday diet, what time restricted eating, and lots of other things that can be applied.
Okay, great. Well, we've got about 10 minutes left to answer some questions that people contributed to the Q&A box. One of them goes back to the biological age question. Someone had asked if there's any tests that you can have done for autophagy to see if you're currently.
Yeah, so we've done that. Also, others have done that, and I'm told that, interestingly, seems to take up to day 5, to the end of the FMD, to get autophagy activated in people, right? So, and this is not very far from what I expected. So the human body needs to be pushed at least to that 5 days, end of the FMD, to begin the process of breaking down components, or not begin, but making it big enough so that that you can measure it in lots of different cells. Maybe in some systems may start earlier or much earlier, but certainly in the blood, we cannot, of course, take biopsies of the liver or organs. So we have to look in the blood cells, and in the blood cells, it seems to take about 5 days to get there.
Are there commercially available tests, or is this only done in?
No, this is done by
trials?
university.
Yeah.
I mean, there may be some companies may have started looking into this, but yeah, I would say I wouldn't encourage it, right? Because you can only do the blood, and I would say it took us a while, even with some of the top centers in the world doing this, right? And so, yeah, I will argue there's probably not too many specialized people doing this. And in a few years, I think that maybe, we'll probably more likely to have the right price and the right method to test this carefully.
Someone asked, are the
But
results
let me say something, right? Please, I mean, talking to everybody, because lots of people focus on one thing. Autophagy is just a part, and maybe a small part, maybe a larger part, we don't know, of this resetting, reprogramming effect, right? So it's there. It's certainly breaking down components, but it's just part, right? So there is a lot more things that are going on. So I wouldn't focus on autophagy as the only thing that matters. And so I would look more into what effects is this having on whatever problem I may have, whether it's back pain or inflammatory issues or high cholesterol, high blood pressure, and lots of other things, right? So yeah, I would focus more on the functionality of the system, because if the system goes back to functionality, it means that it's working. If you see autophagy up, yes, there's some things that may cause autophagy to go sky high, but not necessarily solving your problem.
Exactly. Are the results with FMD the same as water-only fasting for long-term?
Water-only fasting, as I mentioned at the beginning, we started with this, and it was a failure from the beginning. And it's a big concern because of the safety, hypoglycemia, hypotension. And I know, some people listen and say, wow, but I do it all the time. That we cannot think like that. We have to think about 1 million people. And out of 1 million people, how many people are going to eventually get hurt? Because somebody could even do it 6 times or 8 times and not get hurt. And then the 10th time, and you'd be surprised how many people came to us and said, I did water-only fasting, and then on day 4, I pass out, or I was close to passing out. So yeah, so this is why the fasting-mimicking diet is tested on thousands and thousands of people, and is designed with the salts and lots of other things to make sure that this scenario is unlikely. Now, yes, so for some things, water-only fasting could work, and for some things it may not, right? So for example, we did the mouse study where we compared water-only fasting with FMD. The water-only fasting, and this was a Crohn's disease model, and the water-only fasting actually increased leakage, right? Intestinal. FMD did not, water-only fasting increased it. Now, the water-only fasting still had beneficial effects after the return to normal diet, but the FMD had more beneficial effects. And it turned out that it was the prebiotics ingredients contained in the FMD that fed lactobacillus and bifidobacteria, these bacteria species, that then went on to contribute to these regenerative effects and protective effects against the gut inflammation, right? So yeah, so I think, again, going back to my original statement, you need clinical trials. So now Stanford and others are doing trials on Crohn's and colitis. We'll see what happens. But yeah, you need clinical trials with exact compositions. And then if that works, especially if it works consistently, as we're seeing for diabetes and prediabetes, then and only then, I think it's time to say, okay, I'll use it for this purpose.
That was a great example of how more isn't always better. Just because you can fast for longer or more strenuously, it appears that we don't always completely understand the mechanisms and what's at play. So it's better to follow a protocol.
Yeah, and it gets worse, right? Because water-only fasting, if you go long enough, with all kinds of fasting practices, but water-only fasting is probably going to get you there quicker. You can also enter a low energy expenditure hypometabolic state. So the Labor Lab has shown this. This is a New England Journal of Medicine paper from a long time ago. So semi-starvation, if it's long enough, it can get you to a hypometabolic state. And now, and this is also known for calorie restriction. So now the possibility, if you do this for too long in the wrong way, is you enter this state, and this could be epigenetically regulated. What does it mean? That you could have some fairly long term, and this could last potentially years, right? So once you get into this low energy expenditure mode, it could take years before you come out of the low energy expenditure mode, right? So it doesn't mean everybody's going to enter it, and different people may enter it at different times, but certainly improvisation, let's say, oh, I'm doing water-only fasting for 12 days, it's going to be great for me. Not necessary, right? If you enter the hypometabolic state, not only it's risky because it's very long and it's very extreme for the things I said earlier, but it's also, did they switch you to a different state? And if it did, it involves epigenetic changes, how long are you stuck in that state?
Wow. Well, it's important for people to know these risks. Okay, it looks like we've got just a few minutes left. I'm going to try to get in another question before we wrap up. Can you update us on any research on FMD and Alzheimer's?
Yeah, so we published in mice two different models, ApoE4 and triple transgenic. These are mice that are engineered to have all kinds of deposits, reflecting the deposits in people, in Alzheimer's disease patients. And the FMD had remarkable effects on both models in delaying cognitive decline and improving and reducing pathology. One thing that was really impressive was the effect on neuroinflammation, right? So these mouse models, you see a lot of inflammatory markers in the brain elevated or greatly elevated. And many of these in the FMD group, so it was either the Alzheimer's mouse fed a normal diet or fed a fasting-mimicking diet. So if they were fed the fasting-mimicking diet, then you see many of these inflammatory effects being reversed, right? So that's a mouse. Now the people, we just finished the clinical trial, we'll see, but a lot of these patients were early Alzheimer's patients. And so it's so advanced that my guess is that to see clinical effects, we have to go 10 times bigger. Because I think it was 30 and 30 patients. It's too small to see. By the time, and when we talk to neurologists, when we started, they say it's too ambitious. By the time somebody has Alzheimer's already diagnosed, it's going to be like it take almost a miracle to bring it back. And so so I think that we're now thinking, how can we at least go to MCI, mild cognitive impairment, or even earlier, right? And that's where we think it's going to be most effective. Now, keep in mind, and most people don't know this, diabetes diagnosis in the 10 years or so preceding increases the risk of Alzheimer's by 75%, right? So to tell you how all of it is connected, right? So you have diabetes, this makes you almost twice as likely to develop Alzheimer's, right? This is why we think we're confident, and maybe we shouldn't be, but we're confident that if we start the FMD early enough, this could have certainly effects on diabetes that we're seeing, but not just on that, but also on the consequences of this diabetes risk factor.
Thank you so much, Dr. Longo. I think we've reached the end of our time here. Incredible insights that you've provided today. Before we close, can you let our audience know how they can stay informed about your ongoing research and any future developments of the FMD?
Yes, I think the Create Cures Foundation and in the US and the Valter Longo Foundation in Italy, and there are numbers and emails that you can contact to get in touch with the dietitians and nutritionists and physicians also if needed.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you, Whitney.